we really kicked off with the conversation about the first Aquaman and a film that I know we both have a lot of appreciation and adoration for. And so coming into this one with the same director, most of the same crew and cast back, certainly there's a level of expectation there in terms of the movie. But let's go ahead and talk about our general overall feelings of the film. We're going to keep it to non-spoiler for right now before we dive into our deeper dive and breakdown of the film. So if you've not seen Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, you're still safe. You're still good. We will give you the spoiler warning when it's time. But with all that out the way, man, I'll just toss it over to you. How did you feel about Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom?
Huh. Where do I even start? Let me think. So man, we just spoke at length about that first Aquaman, and I'm gonna start with the positive with this movie. And the positive is I think James Wan is still really good at directing the action in this movie. There's still some really cool, I think, things happening underwater that you're able to follow with your eyes. It's like, oh shoot, okay. There's still some things there, and some fun to be had, especially in that kind of last act. It was like, okay, not only that, but unfortunately, one of the only story wise, one of the only redeeming qualities of the movie for me was what they do with Orm and Patrick Wilson's character. He has a whole arc that I was like, oh, I like this arc. This is fine. Unfortunately, he had the best arc. He's like a side character. And to be honest, that is about as a lot of the positivity I can speak about this film because everything else is like a shell. It is a legit placeholder of a movie that we have seen 1,800 times over and over. It when I say generic, I mean it is literally that. But beyond those two things, beyond James Wan's directing and the what Patrick Wilson is doing, I don't really see much merit or something different that is happening in this movie. There's so much here that it's a revenge movie, it's a family movie. It really is about, of course, Aquaman, Arthur learning how to be king. All of that is definitely a thing, but none of it is new. And again, none of it appears to be interesting, at least on the surface. I think there are ideas that they have, but it all feels kind of empty. I remember on my letterbox, I actually called this movie Aquaman Ragnarok. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, I say that because they do go to a bunch of different locations, which some of the different locations are actually decent. But it definitely feels like that movie by the way of which there is a kingdom that you have to care about. There's literally a character in there that's just like Korg. He's like a big rock lobster thing. I don't know what he is. He really feels like Korg. And I call it Ragnarok because it's like the end of the DCEU. It's like literally Ragnarok for the DCEU. And so it just kind of feels like we've been there, done that. This movie is really it's like Thor underwater to me. And it's like I didn't really need any of these things to go the ways in which they did. We didn't talk about it, but of course there's the whole Amber Heard controversy. And you can tell she's still in the movie, but you can tell they were like writing her out, part of me is like, you either include her completely or you don't include her at all. Because why are you here? And that's a really weird thing, I think, to experience on screen. Because every time she appears, I'm like, you're not doing anything. And there's often times where because this is an underwater adventure, there's a lot of times she's CGI. She has to be. All the characters sometimes are, and that's fine. I'm not mad at the CGI, but I'm mad if it's like, dang, she's finally here, and then she's CGI. It's like, what's really going on here? So those are this film, man. Is just it's almost a fitting way for DC to go out in some ways. It's like, yep, this makes sense. This is exactly why you're going the direction you're going. This is exactly why we're rebooting. Yeah, and this movie just has it's just boring. And there's just nothing to really see on screen past again some of those fight scenes, unfortunately. And so yeah, man, it's really sad, but I don't really have much to add. That's really it. It's boring, it's sad, and I wish this wasn't the case.
Well, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom officially the final entry into, I think, one of the most interesting experiments in Hollywood history, one that's going to be talked about for so long on probably what not to do with the franchise. And we'll litigate a lot of that history a little bit later in this discussion. But with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, again, as I said earlier, coming into it, much of my excitement had been deflated just due to everything that's occurred over the past few years. And so being a big fan of the first one and knowing coming into this one that I just did not have that same enthusiasm as I thought I would, it really hindered my ability to enjoy it. But once I saw the film and I actually saw the final product, I felt completely justified in how I felt for the past few months because this
Mhm.
movie didn't really do anything to win me over, to change my feelings and perceptions of what they put forth in this effort. Because ultimately, that word that you said towards the end of your review is exactly what this movie is. This might have been the most boring movie that I've seen over the holiday season. I was just so disinterested and so disengaged, especially for the first hour, I would say. I'm just kind of sitting there like, this is it. This is all we have. This feels like the same redundant thing that we've done already in the first movie. Like, there's not a ton of new stuff here at all. And I think that that might be one of the biggest drawbacks of this film because when you stand it next to the original Aquaman, pretty much all of the same exact ingredients are present here, but with no
Mhm.
real twist and no real change. The villain in this movie is Black Manta, and he wants revenge. Well, he wanted revenge in the first one. There's tension between Aquaman and his brother Orm, and that existed in the first one as well. We have all of the same characters pretty much back, minus one, which we'll talk about, and they're all just kind of giving the same robotic exposition to get us to the next location and it all equals to really nothing. And at least with that first movie, you had a joyous time, you had fun, it felt fresh, it felt new and different. They knew what they were making, they knew what type of movie they were going for because I do think that films of that quality, these these weird big budget effects heavy films that are made in that particular way, which are campy and goofy, and they know that they are
Mhm.
that. I think that there's a place for that. I think that those are
Mhm.
good movies to make.
Yeah.
One of my favorite YouTubers is Patrick Willems, and a few years ago, he made a
Mhm.
video talking about gonzo blockbusters and how Aquaman fit into that category. And there's other movies like Valerian and The City of a Thousand Planets, and
Mhm.
what was that movie? Mortal Engines and Jupiter Ascending.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
these movies that have notoriously bombed, and they're these super expensive films, but at their heart, when they're examining sci-fi and fantasy concepts, there's a
Mhm.
lot to unpack there. And what's interesting is that in the 80s, these genre heavy movies used to get made all the time and they became cult classics over time. They weren't necessarily successful upon release, but they grew with their audiences, like The Princess Bride or Legend, you know, with Tom
Mhm.
Cruise. Like there's these weird movies that people now have an adoration for. And I feel like Aquaman falls into that same category. But the
Yeah.
problem is they don't change that at all for this movie. They don't do anything different, anything new. They don't add any new characters really. Nobody of importance at least. The villain is the exact same. A lot of the plot mechanics and threads are very much pulled over from that first one. And it's just like, why are we doing this? Why are we here? It's so derivative. It's just so much of the same shit that we've seen out of not only DC films, but a lot of comic book films lately, which is kind of the biggest thing that is really hurting, I think, a lot of these films is that there's just nothing new on the table. There's only a few exceptions with the film like Across the Spider Verse, like where we know that there's a fresh take there. We know that we have not seen that type of film before. But many of these movies, I think it's catching up with us that we have kind of circled the well so many times and pulled apart so many of the things that make this particular genre of films distinct that there's just rarely these few examples that come out of the gate and say like, okay, this is going to be something that's even more different than what you saw in the first one. There's this new character, there's this new story. We're going to completely deconstruct everything you thought about this franchise and do something that is going to surprise you or subvert you. Never got that feeling in this movie. Never ever felt that. It was super predictable from beginning to end and just kind of unnecessarily boring
Yeah.
and I'm quite disappointed that this was my Christmas present because like what the hell, you know, you expect a little bit more out of a holiday film, especially a film that, you know, you love the first one, you hope to love the second one, and that's just not the case here. The big positive thing that I'll say about it, the chemistry between Jason Momoa and Patrick Wilson. That
Yep.
is the only reason to watch this movie. They're great together. They were great together in the first one. That does not
Mhm.
change here. They obviously worked well together. They have a great rapport. The whole dynamic between the two is interesting. But again, Similar to many of the other facets of this movie, we have seen it technically before. Just go watch those Thor movies. You called it Thor Ragnarok. Watch any Thor movie, and you have seen the
Yeah.
same exact dynamic with Thor and Loki. And so I do appreciate Jason Momoa and Patrick Wilson bringing their own perspective and style and flavor to it, but it technically is something we've seen before. So that's just not enough to make this stand out and make it distinct from everything else that we've seen. And so it isn't the worst movie that they've put out. It's not at the bottom of my list. I'll go ahead and spoil that right now, but it is certainly still a subpar, mediocre effort, and that's hugely disappointing coming from a director that I like so much, and a film, in the first of the series that I like so much, and a character that I've grown to like in this particular so much. You just hate to see it go out in this fashion, but folks, with all of that said, we're going to get into our spoiler filled thoughts and discussion about Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. So if you've not seen this movie, or if you just don't care and you just want to hear the spoilers anyway, we're going to go ahead and dive in right now. But this is your official spoiler warning. And what we typically like to do, if you're new to the podcast or if you're not familiar, we go character by character. We break down the big moments, their big scenes, what their big arc is, what they're bringing to the movie. We talk about the performance and also the story as well. And so we have to start off with the titular character himself, Aquaman, played by Jason Momoa. I think that this is probably his fourth or fifth appearance in the DCEU, maybe even more. He showed up in Peacemaker randomly. He's done
Oh
Justice
yeah, I forgot
League,
about that.
and yeah, and he's been
Yeah.
around.
A
Um,
Flash
and,
randomly.
yeah, Flash randomly. You're right. You're right. And so this was a casting by Zack Snyder. The Snyderverse still continues to this day. The influences are still felt because Zack Snyder is the one who brought in Jason Momoa in this role, and so where we see him in this particular movie, he's now king of Atlantis, and after the first movie, we saw that whole journey of him being the reluctant hero at first, but then finally accepting what his, I guess, destiny was and facing and confronting his brother and then becoming king of Atlantis so that they could prevent this massive war that would exist between Atlantis and Earth, the human beings of Earth. But now he's kind of bored and over it. We see him at the top of this movie. He is married to Mara, played by Amber Heard. He has a son now, Arthur Curry Jr., but he's just juggling his real life on the surface world and also his, I guess, more political leadership life that's largely driven by his time in Atlantis. And we see him not successfully necessarily juggling it because he's falling asleep at Senate meetings and he's getting pissed on by his young son multiple times. They run with that gag a lot in the opening few minutes of this
They
movie.
did.
And so we just kind of see him, balancing that and also kind of being of one mindset and being of one state of mind compared to what we see with, I guess, the Senate leaders of Atlantis. He does still have superiors that he has to answer to, and they perceive the future of what Atlantis should be differently than him. So he's kind of dealing with all of this stuff, and that's really where we sort of start off with this character. And so before we dive any deeper, really with him, what did you think just about, I guess, where we pick up with Aquaman in this movie, and then also just the way that Jason Momoa, decided to bring somewhat of a new, I guess, somewhat of a new take and a new perspective on where he's developed as a character throughout this universe so far.
Yeah, he's a dad now. And that was like, really, really, really it for me. I at least like, some new dynamic there where it's like, okay, something has changed in his life. That's good. And I feel like I can understand what he was going through as a new king who was like, y'all are bringing me all this stuff that I'm supposed to care about, but it's also pretty boring. I think Jason Momoa yawning at whatever council meeting is how we felt watching the movie. And we, it's I don't know, man. It really just writes itself. It's like we are Jason Momoa watching the movie. This character though, I don't know. I feel like even at the beginning, there was something else that was supposed to be there that should have been there to get us to buy into who he would soon become. But they never really his big downfall at the beginning of the movie is just like they won't let me do anything as a king. And in some ways, I feel like that cheats the character ever so slightly. To where that may be the case, but also it's like what else are you bumping your head against internally? You know what I mean? As a person, where's the growth supposed to come from you? And so I understood his struggle where he was like, council won't let me allow me for anything to get done. You know what I mean? They won't let me. But I don't know. I think I was looking for something else for him to grasp onto. Because at the beginning of the movie, it seems like he's a good dad. I was like, oh man, this dude's a great dad. But of course the issues did lie within he wasn't spending enough time in Atlantis being a king. He was on land being a dad. So yeah, I don't know. That stuff was interesting, but I think I was looking for just a little bit more out of what his character, I think what his character arc would be. You know what I mean? I thought I would get a little bit more of a hint of where we were going. And instead it just felt like, oh, I'm pretty good as a dad. I'm trying to balance my life between the land and the sea, but nobody else likes it. And I think that's a fair quarrel to have. But there was something in me that was like, okay, but what else? And I'm not sure I ever necessarily got to that what else. But I think Jason Momoa, again, I think he's always going to do what he needs to do as Arthur Curry. But I think that for him, in particularly in this film, I think the writing just wasn't enough. There wasn't enough to latch on to. Like I shouldn't feel like, and we'll talk about him in a second. I shouldn't feel like this secondary character of Orm is kind of his arc is overshadowing our main protagonist's character. And part of that, to be honest, could even be camera time. Because I was thinking about it, I was like, yeah, got a lot of camera time in this movie. Even as Black Manta, I was like, hey, we spent a ton of time with Black Manta and his revenge story. And so I feel like all of those storylines just kind of took away from what I think Jason Momoa as Arthur could have been because there was so much happening in the movie.
Yeah, we got a ton of time with Yaya, especially in the early parts of the movie, and it still felt like nothing. And weirdly with Aquaman's character, I think that they introduced that idea of the quarrel that exists between how the council in Atlantis perceives his leadership abilities and the time that he spends on the surface world, since he does split that. He's not
Right.
fully residing in Atlantis. But they just kind of add in a line about that, but they don't really explore that idea. This
Mm-hmm.
council is made up of faceless people that we just don't care about. Like the main person, the main I can't call her a woman because I guess she's a fish, but
Atlantean.
the main the main person on the council, I mean, she's kind of bitchy towards him, but that's really it. Nothing else comes from that. It's just like they don't like his leadership style. He doesn't like that he can't do anything. And okay, I'll just break the rules and I just won't tell you what I'm going to do because that's just the way it is. There could be a more interesting political aspect to that they could explore. And we also never understand like how the citizens of Atlantis might perceive
Yeah.
him as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
is probably the most important aspect. Fuck the council. Like
I agree.
y'all have y'all role. Okay, he has to answer to you. But how do the people feel about him? If the people feel like he's a good leader, then you're not even necessary really as a story device anyway. And so they just didn't go anywhere with that. And then the stuff on the surface world, I mean, this whole opening montage, it wasn't greatly written. It was just so plain and ordinary. And it had a couple of just lame gags and jokes like the baby pissing on it. I'm just like, okay, all right, well, this is what he's dealing with. Wow, such a challenge. He doesn't know how to fucking put a diaper on his kid, like big deal. And that kind of leads us, really into where he goes within the rest of the movie, which does become more of a focal point of him trying to win over, I guess, the respect and admiration from his brother. But I do want to at least, give some credit to Jason Momoa because he is
Yeah.
trying, he is
Mm-hmm.
performing. It doesn't feel like he phoned it in. Outside of the physical aspect, like it's pretty evident that he didn't work out and get in shape for this movie. Like he never
Mm.
he never had a moment like he did in the first movie, shirt completely off. Look how jacked he is. No, the guy just kind of probably showed up to set, which I probably would have done the same thing, knowing what I know about the franchise and the movie. He probably
Yeah.
is like, this isn't going anywhere. This is
Want to go
probably
eat
the
a
last
burger.
time. I'm gonna chill and eat some fucking burgers and wings, and I'm not dealing with all of that extra shit. So I don't blame him, but
Yeah.
beyond that, you can tell that he at least is still trying to perform from a comedic standpoint, from an emotional standpoint. He's still showing up
Mm-hmm.
and doing everything that he can to make it feel the ways that we would want it to feel. Unfortunately, it's just not enough because the movie, the script, and really the whole structure of the film and how it's laid out kind of fails him in that respect. Um, might as well go ahead and move on to Orm, played by Patrick Wilson, because he is so integral. And I think a lot of this conversation will be spent, again, mostly on their relationship and their dynamic between each other. But Orm, the place that we find him in this movie, is kind of he's kind of been exiled from Atlantis. He's been overthrown as the king since now Arthur Curry is in that position, and he's off in the middle of like a desert prison somewhere. And they're withholding water from him, and so they're giving him just enough to keep him alive, but not enough that he can have all of the nutrients and energy that he needs to be the fully physical being that he traditionally is. But they essentially go out to find Orm, and they need him because he's kind of the person that can have the information to lead them to find out more information about this Black Trident, which is very much tied up into the whole Black Manta storyline. But that's really the usage of him in this film. But outside of that, outside of the narrative reason of why it's needed here, how did you feel about Patrick Wilson and just the dynamic of what he had to do in this movie? Since it is somewhat different than I think his performance in the first one. Like, of
Mhm.
course, that tension between him and Arthur is different in this movie as it is compared into the first movie, but it's there. But now he's in a place of, I think, a little bit more of a reflection as opposed to that first movie where he was just headstrong and just wanted to be the one true king. Now he's in a place of learning a little bit more about his brother, his older brother, and maybe becoming
Mhm.
a little bit more accustomed to having a relationship with him. So, what did you think about Patrick Wilson and his entire performance in this film?
What's so crazy about his character in the first one, Orm slash Ocean Master, is like low key he was racist. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if you could call it that, but he did not like land people. He
Nope.
was not messing with it. He wanted to eradicate them, get rid of them so that Atlantis could thrive and survive. But here, in this, there is a little bit more of teetering the line of what I used to know versus what I probably should know, or what it means to learn. And again, to be clear, certain elements of this film still they work just fine. And again, one of them really is that chemistry between Momoa and Wilson. And so I think they do enough here to make it feel like something worth watching when they're on the screen. In anything else outside of it, you're just like, okay, I don't know why I'm here. But when they are on screen, it is like, okay, there's the movie. This is what I'm looking for. And so they do really good job of bouncing off each other. And you know, I don't know. And even then, I always was looking for like, okay, there might be like I don't know, one other thing that I was looking for them to do. I think as a unit to show what this brotherly quarrel was supposed to really mean. But again, for the most part, this was really the best parts of the film. And I think Patrick Wilson, yeah, he's just a good actor, man. And I think he was carrying all the scenes and things that he needed to do. And because they gave him kind of a cool character arc, I think a lot of times we do tend to gravitate towards like the kind of like the angsty, not necessarily the bad guy sometimes, who's the anti-hero, and that's kind of what he was playing in this moment. It's like, oh shoot, okay, what does his redemption arc look like? And I think that can always be, for me anyways, that's almost always interesting because I've seen it go both ways. If I'm watching anime or superhero films, I always like anti-hero stuff because there are moments where it's like, no, you went bad in that moment, or you went good in that moment, and so it's very fun, I think, to always watch on screen, and that's the mode that Patrick Wilson was playing in this movie, and that again was the most, I think, interesting part of the film for me. And yeah, and when you have, I think, two good actors in Momoa and Wilson who know what they're doing on screen, that happens to be the best part of the movie. And that's exactly what this was. They bounce off each other really well. They had chemistry. And it feels like that's where all the energy was for the film.
And what's also cool, at least about Patrick Wilson, is the fact that him and James Wan are frequent collaborators. This might be,
Hmm.
I don't know, like their fifth or sixth movie together, maybe even more. I might be missing something. I know Insidious, Conjuring, First Aquaman, this one. They work together often, so this is a director actor relationship that's been
Hmm.
successful and it's been good. Clearly they trust each other, and I think we do kind of see the best out of Patrick Wilson when he is working with James Wan. Even if the
Hmm.
material around him isn't always the strongest, Patrick Wilson does really, really good work here, and I appreciate that energy and that excitement and that enthusiasm that he brought to the movie. He did in fact get jacked. Unlike Jason Momoa,
No, he did.
he got shredded, and you could tell he was explicitly working out to make sure that he had a number of shirt off scenes. Because when we find him, I mean, he is just skinny and malnourished. Like he looked like he's on the brink of death, and he's within an inch of his life. And then there's that moment on the beach when they escape the prison, and he just gets completely engulfed in the water and bounces out. And now he has a six pack. He's completely jacked. His traps are ridiculous. His arms are huge. He's whooping ass, and he looks like a shredded Jesus Christ. And it's great. It's a great scene and a great sequence. I love that he was able to just transform himself because I don't even think he got in this type of shape for the first one. So that
Yeah,
was cool to see. And they do have a number of funny moments. Really, this middle section of the movie when
the
when
best part.
Aquaman goes to find him is kind of the best part because you do get to see him just reeling from all the events of the first movie. You get to see him kind of on his back leg trying to come from behind as an underdog. And then when he does come to form, they have great chemistry. There's that scene where and I didn't, even think about this, when I first saw it, but when they run away from the prison and they go into the water, he's running really odd. Like he has a really weird form to how he
Mm,
runs. He doesn't move his
mm-hmm.
arms at all. He just runs with his feet. And then they circle back to that joke later when they're in the jungle and he's running again. And Aquaman is like, "Why are you running like that? Use your arms. You'll go faster." And he's like, "Oh, I didn't know." And then he just takes the fuck off. Like that's great stuff. Like you like to see that
That's good.
stuff. And
Mhm.
him not really being accustomed to how earthly things are done. He doesn't have a clue about food and what's good on Earth, and Aquaman is like, that's one thing we do better on Earth than in land. It's like the food is great. So those were like nice, cool gags, to really just have that fish out of water story, for lack of a better term. And it really carries the movie in many regards. But again, unfortunately, I think just the entire or the entire, sort of skeleton of the film around them just it doesn't do anything more than what it should. We should move on though and talk about Black Manta, played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, also returning here from the first one. So in that first movie, it was interesting because he was the secondary villain. He wasn't the
Mhm.
primary villain. Ocean Master, Orm, he was the
Yeah.
primary villain, but Black Manta was always in the background because when we first see Aquaman really in that movie, he's rescuing people from a submarine that's being taken over by pirates. And we learn that David Kane, played by Yahya, is essentially a pirate, and his father is also working together with him. And then his father dies because Aquaman refuses to help him as the submarine is sinking. And so now this big revenge mission has been his primary task and his primary concern across two films now.
Mhm.
And I guess they teed it up at the end of the first Aquaman with the post credit scene that he was going to be the big main villain, because
Yeah.
we saw that Randall Park's character found him and was going to heal him and give him new technology. So we always knew that this was going to kind of be the case, but as we enter into this film here, we see that yes, he is the number one big bad in this movie. He's primarily the one that is again trying to carry out this revenge mission. The one big change is that his technology is now advanced, and he also comes into possession of this black trident, this long lost trident that gives him these weird, crazy powers. It felt like some Lord of the Rings shit, but not in the great ways that it should feel like Lord of the Rings, but it just does a lot to, I think, get him to the level of being an equal to Aquaman and being able to take him out almost single-handedly. So how did you feel about those opening moments of where we left him off with the first Aquaman and just his primary motivation into this movie and how they decided to, I guess, add an additional layer onto his character as he pursued Aquaman?
Yeah, there was I don't know, it's so interesting because you speak about the first Aquaman, how he was like a secondary villain. In here, in some ways, when he gets the trident, he becomes one again because Kordax is literally manipulating him through the trident to try to release him. And I was like, dang, you are you ever going to be the primary villain for real? For real? Is this ever like he kind of feels like Black Manta, and he started to feel like Mojo Jojo in the Powerpuff Girls, like like I'll get you again, and then that's it. Like that's the end of him. And so I don't know, man.
What a
It's
bum, Jesus.
what a bum, man. And I think the thing I wish there was just another I wish there was still a better 2-for-1 motivation of him going after Atlantis and Aquaman, but it still feels very much I'm here to avenge my dad. And it's like, okay, that's it. And pretty much, yeah, that's really it. I'll do whatever it takes, and including melting all the ice caps in the world that will potentially destroy everything. Like, what are we doing? I just don't know what we're doing. I will say though, Yaya, I mean, he's doing what he can. Technically, he's doing what he's supposed to do. It's the script again. The script is just it's there. I did like a lot of the technology things they did do though. I like the like octopus ships. I thought those are pretty cool. They're like rotate. They're like tentacles rotate, and as they go searching for bunkers to look for this energy that nobody has seen for a very long time,
Yeah.
for
That part
centuries.
that part felt very James Cameron, and I like that because like it
Yeah.
reminded me a lot of the Abyss,
Mm-hmm.
Avatar. Like I
It
could see the
did.
James Cameron influences there.
And I wish it meant more. You know what I mean? Like we're doing this whole scavenge. There are different, little pockets to get this energy from that could potentially change certain things. And it's like, yeah. And then I don't know. It just all doesn't it doesn't you it, the payoff isn't enough for me to do all the work that we did with I guess a lot of that. So man, Black Manta again, he took up a lot of screen time, which at first I was like, okay, this could be good. And then by the end of it, you're like, no, that wasn't good, bro. Like, what? We spent way too much time on this for it to resolve in this way. So yeah, man, I don't. Part of me doesn't like how they sidetrack. At least if you're gonna bring him back, and he's a secondary in the first one, don't make him a secondary again in the second one. Even though we know he's being manipulated. In fact, at least I wish they would have made it so he was coherent, or he did it on purpose. You know what I mean? He wanted to go along with oh boy in his villainous scheme, rather than he was slowly being possessed. And it's like, no, bro, you're being manipulated. You're Loki, a secondary villain. Again, that's unfortunate. So yeah, it's really interesting because Black Manta is supposed to be this big Aquaman villain, and they try to give him the screen time to be that, but he still overall never came to really feel like that. Like, and the part of what makes this movie hard is not only that Avatar came out, but that Black Panther came out. And we seen what Namor, when you really about that business, what the fuck it looks like. And unfortunately, Black Manta, he was about the business, but it didn't look like what Namor, the way Namor is about the business. And so it's just uneven. And I wish they did a better job of bringing his character to have more meaning by the end of it, man. Bring him to the forefront, let him know that he's about that business, and that he can get he can stand on it. And unfortunately, he never really technically stood on the business that he was looking for.
Yeah, unlike Namor, he did not follow through to do what he said he was going to
Did not
do.
follow through.
He said, "I'm gonna murder Aquaman's family. I'm gonna kill everybody that he loves. I'm gonna destroy his life," and none of that really happened at all. He didn't see any of that through. And Black Manta is supposed to be the arch nemesis of Aquaman. And so when you reach this film where he is supposed to be that primary antagonist, you want to see that level of threat come to pass, and you want to see that manifest in the story. And it never did because of all the things that you said, just the fact that he ultimately is being manipulated, puppeteered by a stronger, darker, bigger force. And that was just like the part of the movie where I was like, why did we even need this? Like, why do we have
Mm-hmm.
to get this complicated with the story? And I think that's kind of what I do want to talk about even more. Like you said, we spend a lot of time with him, but somehow Yahya Abdul Mateen, with more screen time in the sequel, still feels as underserved as he did in the first one. And that's
Yeah.
just a strange place to end up in. And it's almost confounding how that happened, because there's that whole section in the first act where we see him working with Randall Park's character Steven to find these Atlantean artifacts. They spend a ton of time looking for this stuff, and there's this whole attack and where he finds the trident, and that shit is just flat out boring. It never interested
Mm-hmm.
me at all. I'm just sitting there like, can we please get to the point? Can we pick up the pace? But then from there, the plot only gets further complicated and further muddled, because then they introduce this orichalcum energy
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and now there's a chain of events that's being set off across the world that's causing the weather to all of a sudden suffer. There's greenhouse gas energy being emitted. There's temperatures rising. There's hurricanes and floods. It's like, all right, now we're introducing so many different elements and not allocating the appropriate amount of time to any one of these individual things to make them coherent and make sense. All there
Right.
is a line or a throwaway scene. Like there's that one scene of his father watching TV and we see the floods, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
but how is that really relevant and how is it important? Like, yeah, we know we need to stop it, but I mean, this started off as a revenge mission, and now it's like a complete, just like world destruction mission out of
Hmm.
nowhere. And it's like I don't really know what this guy wants because he is not really in charge of his own faculties anymore. And so, how did you feel about just the construction of that stuff, like that scene where he goes and finds the trident? I guess really all the scenes with his character in particular. Anytime that we get
Hmm.
away from Aquaman and Orm and we just completely focus on him, just the dynamic and really the chemistry or lack thereof between him and all of his minions that I guess was working on his behalf.
Yeah, and we're talking about Randall Park in a second, but there was like repeat moments of Randall Park peeking into, Black Manta's lair, being like, "What's wrong with this dude?" I was like, "We did that again. We had to see that more than once. What is this repetition that we're going through right now?" And I, the reason it's so weird to me is because I think each individual idea is interesting, but they don't do enough for one to make it interesting, if that makes sense. Like even though I'm talking about him being like secondary, he's possessed and stuff. Part of that stuff is kind of like, oh shoot, this dude is kind of possessed. His eyes are green. What's going on? And then it gets weird. Or like everything we're talking about the weather. That's huge, right? Like if you're gonna make an Aquaman movie, and you talk about the sea and how important the ocean is to the environment, I think there's merit to that. If you're saying there's a villain over here who is melting ice caps and that is creating problems in the world, talk about that. Like that is one thing, but then there's just it was just too much happening, kind of, and kind of like you said, you hinted upon it. We go to his dad and you hear on the news, they're like, yes, it's snowing and lightning at the same time. And you're like, is that it? Are we supposed to care about that? Like, are there more people in danger? Like, is that it? Would you get a quick newscast
Yeah, that's
for
strange.
this?
Like, how are we supposed to care about any of this shit happening when we just see it on a television set? That makes no sense.
And now it just made me think about what makes this movie so kind of detached for me is there wasn't enough attachment to either land or sea. And the whole movie is about
That's it.
Arthur
Yeah.
having to balance both. If you're
Hmm.
telling me the world is on fire, I need Arthur to care about the world being on fire up above. There needs to be some characters up there that like they going through it, or what's really cool about Justice League when we first meet Aquaman is he's literally like tied to these people, this small village. I thought it was one of the coolest things for Aquaman because it's like, yeah, that's accurate. It's something Aquaman would do. Of course, he would be tied to this little small village and help them fish and do all these other things. And then we get to this film, we don't really see any of that. Like, why should we? Only reason we care about the land is because the sun is up there. It doesn't feel like there is any attachment to that. And so, that being said, that takes away from everything that Black Manta's kind of doing because it's like, but why should we care? And again, even in that scene, it goes on, we should care about the sun. Like, the sun is really it. He is the whole liaison for the land, unfortunately. And I feel like it should have been better than that. It should have painted a better picture than that to get us to buy in. Because Aquaman's not supposed to just care about his son, right? He should care about all of the land. And we didn't get that. And so, yeah, the way it's structured, it was just weird. Again, individually, every idea is like, okay, I can see why that might make sense. That would be cool, but they never do the work to make us really care about any of it.
Not at all. And that was one of the things that really stood out is that this stuff is just moving so quickly. Which is weird because it's still a 2 hour movie, 2+ hour movie, but these things are moving so quickly, and because the focus is just kind of scattershot, it's not allowing us as an audience to really connect to it and really, I think, perceive it in the way that it should be. It's that it is a world threat that could end civilization. Like, this is supposed to be a catastrophic thing, but there's just too many ideas introduced that are just so half baked, And
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that I felt with this movie, which is really interesting coming into this film, and we talked about this when the first Aquaman came out, is that that movie is so jam packed from beginning to end with so many things. It's kind of astounding how
Mm-hmm.
much James Wan was able to fit into that movie. I remember seeing it and thinking like, yo, he just made this movie like they'll never make another Aquaman movie again. Like, if you never ever see this character on the big screen, you got your fucking fix in Aquaman 1. And that might have actually been true because in the
Mm-hmm.
second one there's such a lack of new ideas, or at
Yeah.
least a lack of exploration of potential new ideas. Like, often I
Mm-hmm.
just felt like there is just nothing there's no depth here. There's nothing for really for me to sink my teeth into because we're introducing these things that could be interesting, but they're all just explored on a very surface level. You know, nothing is ever really unpacked and explored further in the ways that I think that it should be if you want us to really gravitate towards, you know, the story in particular. And a lot of that is due to the fact of how they handle Yahya Abdul Mateen and how they handle Black Manta and just his whole motivation, how it just gets lost in the shuffle once this bigger thing comes into play. But the bigger thing, it's not impressive at all. It's this character called
Mm-hmm.
Cordax, who it's like this mythical monster creature. How did you feel about Cordax? Because like we got another flashback scene, very similar to the first one, which kind of shows like this long history. I remember in the first one, you know, when Aquaman has to go first find the trident, he meets that sea creature. Which was a wasn't that sea creature voiced by like Annette Bening? Like somebody random voiced that
Probably.
big. It was just the most random thing. Very similar here. Martin Short comes in and voices that rock lobster.
The
That's what
rock lobster
I'm
guy.
gonna call it a
Yeah.
rock lobster. That's the funniest shit
I,
ever. But we get like this other flashback which shows like Cordax and the whole trident, how it was created, the curse, whatever the fuck it is, this blood magic stuff. Just a lot of stuff that I was just sitting there like, yo, what? What's going on here? Why do I give a fuck about any of this? How did you feel about that? Like once we got to that part where, you know, pretty much every character just kind of stood in a circle. It's story time, folks, and we just get Orm just rattling off all this exposition to
uh,
tell us like why Cordax is such a threat.
so it's funny because this is another one of those things where Cordax, I think, would have been a cool villain if he had a proper movie. You know what I'm saying? It's just like almost like you said, James. This is like one of those. I feel like instances of James Wan being like, "Oh shit, this ain't gonna never happen again. We got to throw Cordax in here. How do we get Cordax in the movie? How do we get Cordax in the movie?" And that's exactly kind of what it feels like. Because there is kind of something cool between what should have been like this big parallel between Cordax and Arthur's and Orm's dad with him and with Arthur himself and Orm himself. And we don't again they kind of touch on it, but it's not a thing. And it should have been a whole thing, but it's not because Cordax is moving through this whole he's moving through Black Manta. You know, he doesn't really get the opportunity to be his own character. In fact, we see him for like maybe like oh man, 25 seconds.
Yeah, like a
It
scene or
was
two at most,
or
really.
two. We don't see him a lot at all. But like you said, it's this whole exposition dump of what happens, what curse falls upon him, and what that looks like, and how with the trident, and there's so much greenness happening, and it just made me sigh kind of by the end of it. I said, "Oh my goodness, is this what we're doing here, man?" So yeah, it for me, it again, it kind of sucks because I think had there been of a breath of fresh air knowing this wouldn't be the last Aquaman movie, part of me feels like Cordax would have been like the next big bad for Aquaman, but we couldn't do that. We didn't have time to do that. But here we are. Let's throw Cordax in here, make it 20 seconds. We're gonna do all his whole story in the 35 seconds, 40 seconds. And this is how me and you's dynamic is going to be. Just Arthur, just like me and you, it's Cordax and Dad, and we're gonna resolve it. And I don't know, man. It's just weird. I wish we had more focus. That's to be honest, this movie could have been different with focus. I wish we had more focus. Not more time. I'm not gonna say that because it's already like you said, 2+ hours. I'm not gonna say I wish you had more time, but I wish we had more focus. Because he could have been a cool villain. And yeah, it's just unfortunate. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like there was more there, but we'll never get more, and that sucks. And it is what it is. Yeah, maybe part of me feels like Warner Brothers was doing some weird stuff potentially. I don't know. Like every time something like this happens, I'm like, did Warner?
Oh, this felt like a committee movie as fuck. I
Yeah,
mean, there was, as I said earlier, like multiple rounds of reshoots, at least three, I think even four. Like James Gunn even recently ordered a new round of reshoots, and there were visible moments I could tell like this was
Mm-hmm.
patched in, things were taken out, people probably had their roles reduced, like a Amber Heard, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
this subplot was introduced all of a sudden to make it whatever the fuck. I don't know. Do you remember like they were gonna make that spin-off movie, The Trench? You remember that was a thing?
Yeah, I do remember that.
And they canceled it. You know, that was gonna be a whole separate
Mm-hmm.
thing that they were gonna do. I remember vividly after that first movie came out, so successful, $1 billion, and Peter Safran, who's now in charge, but who also produced the first Aquaman movie, had talked about how they were gonna really make Aquaman an anchor character and build a world out for him into itself. There was going to be a Trench movie, maybe some other characters would get spin-off stuff. That was when, the DCEU was just in disarray. There were going to be like 7 different universes coexisting at the same time. It's like, what the fuck is any of this? But then that just got canceled, and I wonder, probably not, but I wonder if maybe Cordax as a character might have
That
been a
was
part
that's
of
the
that.
trench.
And and
Mm-hmm.
and they
Mm-hmm.
decided to shoehorn him in here to still have him represented in some way because I guess that they liked the idea enough and they thought that it could work here, and clearly it just does not. But it does feel like that there's pieces and parts from other things and other ideas that never came to
Mm-hmm.
pass that they just tried to stuff in this movie.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. Because if you don't talk about some of these characters now, will they ever get talked about again? You know what I mean? Like,
Probably not.
because especially we know James Gunn as like crazy. He pulls characters out the wazoo, and like you really don't know what he's going to do. And so it's just yeah, it's like dang, if I don't talk about him now, we may never hear about him. Part of me does feel like James Gunn was like, we gotta we gotta talk about Kodak somehow, and this is their way to get him into the movie. So I don't, yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. Speaking of reshoots, because the rest of the characters, I'm gonna be honest, we're gonna probably speed through them.
Oh yeah.
But you remember also with the reshoots, there were rumors of possible appearances from Bruce Wayne or Batman, like multiple times over. There was
Mm-hmm.
rumors that Michael Keaton was going to show up, that Ben
Mm-hmm.
Affleck was going to show back up. I mean, Ben Affleck, I think filmed stuff. Like he actively filmed stuff. Jason Momoa was leaking photos of those two together on the Warner Brothers lot. Like I think a lot of this stuff was filmed and actually captured, but spoiler alert, folks, none of that's in the movie. Like there's no connections to anything else. Maybe that is a benefit because they don't want to tease out things that are not going to be, they're not going to have any sort of conclusion. They're not going
Mm-hmm.
to have any sort of closure to them. But it's just again, I think a weird thing in this day and age when we're so tapped in. We learn so much about movies and their development before we ever see them, and we hear all these things like, well, what could that mean? What could that be? Could Michael Keaton now be the new Batman in this universe? Is Ben Affleck gonna like actually come back and maybe do something more long term? And all the lingering questions that we have. So, I mean, like, did you even think about that as you were watching the movie? Like, did you have the thought cross your mind, like, yo, where's the Batman stuff that they were talking about all this time ago?
Nah, it didn't. For me, I don't know. I not until you just brought it up just now. I was like, oh yeah,
The movie was
that
that bad, y'all. He
it,
didn't even think about Batman.
I mean, I never thought in watching this last DCEU Aquaman film that Batman was gonna show up. And yeah, I don't know, man. And even in watching it, I could not imagine Batman being in this movie. Like I really legit like not, I can't even usually I have like some form of like, oh yeah, they could fit here. He could have been over there. Nope. You lost me. Maybe Batman's what we were missing. That's the tie to the land that we were missing the whole time. It's because Batman cares about the land. That's it. No, I really don't know. But yeah, I didn't think about it. I didn't. I
You
don't know.
would think with these worldwide catastrophes happening, these weather,
Where's the
these
Justice
really
League?
dramatic weather events, you would think that somebody from the Justice League would say something like, Bruce, is he gonna like, yo, Aquaman? Fuck's going on with the water right now, bro? Tell me something so I know how to prepare and
Mm-hmm.
create a contingency plan for y'all asses because y'all got some other shit going on down in Atlantis. But we didn't get any of that. Now, look, I mean, I remember we talked about this with the Flash earlier this year. I appreciated that they had connections to the DCEU. We saw
Mm-hmm.
Batman obviously a lot in that movie. Wonder Woman popped up, even though I think none of us really cared when we saw Gal Gadot because they just overexposed her, and we know she's not coming back at this point. But still, it kind of made sense. It's like, damn, Barry's like the only guy available and he's like the most green. We can't get anybody else. And then she shows up
Uh-huh.
late. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool. I wish it happened like 5 years ago when y'all were trying to prove yourself. It's a little too late now.
Mm-hmm.
But none of that happened here. And they, it's just weird. It's just weird when you hear all this stuff and then you just get to the movies and it's like, oh, I guess they just filmed that for nothing or they didn't think it was good, whatever reason. But let's keep moving here with the characters. Randall Park, Dr. Stephen Shin, he's returning here technically because he did appear in that first movie in the post-credit scene. And he's mainly sort of the right-hand person on behalf of Black Manta because he's the scientist. He's helping him find these artifacts. But all the while, he's realizing how fucking loony and crazy Black Manta is. He's like, "Yo, you're willing to kill babies? You're willing to do all of this extra shit?
Nah,
I'm
that's
not.
nut.
I'm not with that at all." And so we see him start to change his allegiance throughout the course of the movie, eventually taking the side of Aquaman and Orm. But I don't know. Randall Park's a really good actor, and he's just here to look scared and frightened.
Yeah.
That's really all he does in this movie. Just look like he's about to shit his pants. It's almost kind of the same character as what he plays in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like the
Yep. Gotta have the
same
coward.
the same
I,
version as what we see in WandaVision and Ant-Man. Just not as funny and with less
mm-hmm.
personality somehow. And again, Randall Park's really good. Like he's actually super talented, can be extremely funny, if you write him well, but
Oh yeah.
you just don't get any of that here. So I mean, what were your thoughts on just, how they utilize Randall Park throughout the story?
Yeah, he's just like you said, the device to show us all how crazy Black Manta is. And I guess they had to have some kind of scientist that was talking, regularly when you deal with the ocean and ice caps and all of these other things. I guess you got to have a scientist because Black Manta wasn't acting like one. So this dude, he had to have this guy to kind of be afraid of the big bad, who's supposed to be his right hand. And you get that character a lot, but they didn't really give Randall Park much to do here. And yeah, he's kind of a shell, like you said. He does feel like the same character as he plays in the MCU, but less interesting in almost every way possible. I think because the MCU maybe I don't know. It's so weird because the MCU I was going to say more punchy, but Aquaman it tries to be pretty punchy. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, I guess we got to bring you back. You were in the post credit scene. This is your character. And that's it. That's really it. He's just the shell of a character, and that's all we get from him.
Yeah, I don't even know if he had truly like a standout moment. There were just a couple of times where he was considering, sort of abandoning ship, and then he just
Mm.
changed his
He saved
mind.
he saved the baby, I guess.
He
That's the
saved the baby. There was that one moment where he pretended that he was gonna, hold Orm and Aquaman at gunpoint and take them and imprison them, and then he all of a sudden revealed his true plan. Like, this guy's fucking crazy. Can I be with you all?
hmm
I guess that was his best moment. But yeah, they don't really do anything with him. He's just here and present and just not really much of a major factor. As you said, he's just kind of there to illustrate how far off the deep end and how consumed with revenge that Black Manta is at this point, and provide a little bit of sci-fi gobbledygook, some shit that's not going to make sense anyway because it's all made
hmm
up. So not much to say there. But speaking of not much to say, Amber Heard is Mara, another character returning here. Had a big presence in the first one. I mean, she was really the
hmm
uh the conduit for Aquaman between the surface world and Atlantis. She was the one that told him about his lineage and his history for the most part, guided him back to Atlantis, showed him what existed underwater, like really all that was there. Um, and was really kind of a major factor. Now, lots happened outside of this film in that time. Amber Heard has obviously, I think, to nobody's surprise at this point, we've all heard the stories about the dissolution of her relationship with Johnny Depp, how it's turned into court proceedings multiple times over. I mean, it's just been a super controversial time for them both,
hmm
and just not great looks. And people feel their own ways. Not here to litigate that shit at all. People feel how they feel, but I think it'd be foolish to think that that clearly did not have an effect on her presence throughout this particular
All
movie.
right.
If you
hmm
ask the filmmakers, if you ask James Wan, he'll give the I think the correct answer, but technically the politically correct answer and say like, well, her
hmm
role was always going to be small. It was
Yep.
always going to be an adventure movie between Aquaman and Orm. It was always written that
hmm
way. And while that may be true, I find it hard to believe that before all of the controversial shit popped off, I find it hard to believe that she would be just such a little factor in this movie to the point that She's literally not needed. And I mean, they kind of tipped us off early when we got the first trailer a few months ago. There was one shot of her. That was it. That was all you saw of her. No speaking lines at all. And really here, she has probably three or four lines. Just, sort of agreeing with somebody off to the side. There's even a couple of shots where I noticed like they cut her out the frame. I'm like, she's just like her thigh is just like halfway in the frame, but you don't see nothing else. So she's just not a factor at all. I mean, she's married to Arthur. That's her big, linchpin to him, and she helps
Hmm.
him with the adventure, and she's raising their son, and she shows up to fight, does have some action scenes, but that's kind of it. They don't really do much in the way of development or narrative, sort of purpose for her throughout this movie. So any thoughts on just Amber Heard and her presence throughout the story?
Yeah, what's crazy is even Walter Hamada was even like part of the trial, right? Between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. And it's like
Yeah.
if you but also just kind of like James Wan, probably even more so, if you ask Walter Hamada, he was like, oh yeah, no, we were always potentially gonna recast her anyway. This I'm like, come on, y'all. Like, y'all can't y'all can't be serious.
Bullshit.
Because who else? No, you weren't. You weren't going to recast her. It's the trial. It's the trial. But yeah, it is what it is. It's unfortunate. But yeah, she didn't have really anything. It's funny because now when I think about this movie, I have one scene in my head from this movie from her, and it's the moment where Arthur's getting peed on by his son, and she moves the pee to make him get peed on. For some reason, that is like the one scene from this movie that's memorable to me that stays in my head. Like part of me is like, oh yeah, what did she do in this movie again? What happened? What does she have to say? And I don't know why. That's the thing that keeps showing up in my head. The other thing about her in this film I wanted to point out was her hair was hella red.
Oh
It's
yeah,
like,
they went all the way with it.
whoa, like fire engine red. That's the red we're going with here. I don't know. That was just like an interesting choice. Again, of course this is very comic booky movie. Shoot, Arthur's costume was crazy. But I just did not expect her hair to be that red when walking into the theater. It was a little, yeah, I just wasn't ready for that. But yeah, she didn't have anything to do. She barely had any lines. And again, it does suck because uh, she could have been that thing to again help us feel like this is why Atlantis is important. You know what I mean? This is like to drive home like Atlantis is this big thing and you need to pay attention to this big thing, Arthur. And she wasn't that presence and it takes away from the movie. It does. It sucks. It's like, dang, you're not there to on behalf of your husband who is the king. So yeah, it's just too bad. We don't get it. We don't get no moments with her. And she's also like many of the other characters here, it's a shell. Just kind of she's supporting. She is way down in billing. Like when Randall Park gets more, you know what I'm saying, gets more TV, gets more camera time than you do. Ooh wee, you're in the deep end for real. So yeah, it's too bad.
I mean, and what they could have done with her character equally as important as Atlantis is now the surface world for her because they have a whole son who is being raised on the surface world. And she should be in a similar position as Arthur in that
Mm-hmm.
push and pull that division of time and responsibility between these two worlds because she was fully Atlantis in the first one, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but now she's also adapted her lifestyle to be on the surface world, and so they don't ever do anything with her character or really Arthur even to explore that. Like when you think about the moment when Manta reveals just like how sinister his plan is supposed to be, like what he truly wants to do, he wants to murder his entire family.
Mm-hmm.
He says it, and it's like, well, one, it's not going to happen. It's pretty predictable that it's just not going to go
Right.
that way. But secondly, even when he said it, I didn't feel that any of those characters were in any legitimate danger. Like I didn't
Mm-hmm.
think that Amber Heard would actually be killed off. I didn't think that his father would be killed off, or even his son. And that's a shame because we should feel an emotional connection to them to make us at least somewhat fear for their state and ultimately their
Yeah.
existence within this story. And because we don't get that time with them, because they are so much on the periphery of the story, that's just like a non-factor. It doesn't amount to anything. It doesn't mean anything. And there's just no threat, no danger, no sense of danger or urgency. I mean, he just goes and kidnaps the baby easily, and that's just kind of it. And they cry and scream, and then they go get the baby back, and it's like, okay, well, that felt weightless and emotionless and empty, and so it's even more, I think, even more of a testament to not only, just the fact that they reduced her and reduced, her purpose in this film, but just there wasn't anything connecting us to the family at all. Like anything that
Mhm.
might have been established in that first one, anything that might have felt like it was really important, like his relationship with his mother and the truth that he learned about his mother, all of that evaporates. None of that is of any factor in this story. And that's just like kind of weird to me that they just disregarded a lot of that. Um Dolph Lundgren as Nearest, again, a character who just comes in and speaks a lot of lines. He's adding further exposition on top of exposition. I think that there's like three exposition characters here at least. Really, I guess his big purpose in this movie is to be skeptical of Orm. That's his function. He's the one guy that's like, I don't fucking trust that guy. I know what he's up to. We cannot work with him. That's really his whole function throughout the movie, and that's kind of it. And they don't really do anything more with Dolph Lundgren here. He's just kind of there to once again explain things and just be that one person that's like, no, fuck Orm, he's not good. We gotta make sure that he doesn't try to betray us. And so thoughts on Dolph Lundgren, and just what he was able to, I guess, bring with the little that he had to work with in this film.
He's always crazy to see on screen for me in this movie. Because it's like, bro, you like Rocky and Expendables, and then you're like this underwater crazy comic book movie. I don't know. It's just always funny seeing him in this. But he yeah, I don't have much for him. I did like that moment though, between him and Orm where the octopus is grabbing his leg and Orm is like, I'm not gonna save you, and then he comes back and save him. That's a cool moment. I didn't mind that. But yeah, like you said, he's pretty much here to be skeptical of Orm and I guess eventually forgive him. I guess that was forgiveness. So yeah, it was a cool little moment, I guess, but I mean, it's
Predictable as
not
it was, because
predictable as hell.
yeah,
Predictable as hell, but yeah, it was just another character that's like been there, done that. Like you said, very exposition heavy guy. Yeah, man, another one of them characters they could have just done so much more with, right? Because he's technically like I don't even know what it's called in Atlantis, but the war general. I don't know what
right.
he's considered. He's pretty much like the war general, and I just feel like he should have just had just I don't know a more substantial relationship between the king who is trying to stop wars, you know what I'm saying, with the council. It's just I don't know. All these characters is like I'm glad you exist, but you could have done more as a character, and that exists for his character too. So yeah, overall, I'm not like super mad at him, but it's also like, yeah, you didn't have much to do either. You're kind of just here.
Yeah, just completely underwritten, just another
Hmm.
physical presence to be on the team, to try to stop Black Manta. I will say what's interesting about Nearest and Dolph Lundgren here, and this is weird to me, but Willem Dafoe is not in this movie. And he was a
Yeah.
big character in the first one. He plays Volko. He was Arthur's mentor, and he
Hmm.
trained him. And due to scheduling conflicts, allegedly, Willem Dafoe was not able to return to this film, and so they wrote him out by killing him. And so this character that was very, very prominent in the first movie is no longer in this franchise because he's been killed off. Which is a shame because Willem Dafoe is great. He's literally one of my favorite actors. Also, shout out to
Hmm.
him, just received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. But I think a lot of what he probably would have done, they just kind of shifted that over to Nearest and just kind of gave him those lines.
Hmm.
Which is equally alarming because you want Willem Dafoe to do more and be more important. Like I don't want him to just be on the side spouting off shit to say like, oh yeah, now we have to go here. But that's probably what happened with the construction of Nearest's role in this particular movie. Like we're just gonna give him what probably would have been the stuff that Willem Dafoe would have been largely responsible for handling in this film. But either way, it's just not good. It doesn't matter who would have said it. I mean, fucking Martin Luther King could have said in this movie, and I still would have been like, yeah, that shit sucks, bro. It's just not good. So that is what it is. Tamara Morrison comes back as Thomas Curry. He's Arthur's father. Again, I think mostly here is just a symbolic presence, as somebody that Arthur needs to protect. Not really involved in any of the action, not centrally involved in the happenings of this movie, kind of just taking care of the baby, making sure that he's babysitting Arthur Jr. And
Good
that's
old
really it.
granddad. Hmm.
In that first movie, a lot of his presence was really kind of wrapped up in the relationship with Atlanta, his wife, who had disappeared and went away, and he thought that she was dead, and there was a lot there, and it's like, wow, it's a father-son relationship, and he had to raise Arthur on his own, and now all of a sudden his whole life has been, kind of a lie, and he's now aware of just everything else that's out there, including his wife and the existence of her, and they reconnect. Some pretty good stuff there, and his role in the first movie wasn't gigantic per se,
Hmm.
but it was of central importance to the plot. Here, I mean, he's just smiling with the greatest veneers in the world, and that's just kind of it. So what did you think about Tamara Morrison, and I guess just him being the best babysitter and the best granddad possible to Arthur Jr.
Where where was the stuff between him and Atlanta in this movie? Like, I just really thought that we were gonna get like some more reconnection between him and Atlanta. And both of them coming into terms that they're grandparents for the first time.
That's a lot of material to work with. It's some really good stuff, really interesting things.
It's there. It's right there. It's easy. Like, and like you said, kind of similar to the first movie. It's not like you have to give that stuff a ton of time. You know what I'm saying? But not to address it at all. I feel like the first time I seen Tom in Atlanta together is when Tom was on his deathbed, damn near. Was when he got fucked up by Black Manta. I feel like it's the first time I seen Atlanta even talk to the dude. I could be wrong about that because I forgot half the goddamn movie. I ain't gonna lie to you. But like,
It's forgettable, definitely.
but like, what? Like, why did where is that dynamic? It was so weird. Especially that's quite literally how partially this whole story starts is between those two people. And what could make this movie interesting is those parallels. I talked about the parallel between the Kings and what could have been between Orm and Arthur. We don't really get into it, I think, how we should have. And I feel the same way here about what grandparenthood looks like in parallel to these brand new parents that we have in Mira and Arthur. I don't know, man. They're just things that's like sometimes all you got to do is just address it. Like say hello, this is a thing, and get out of there. And it's almost like some people don't know, or sometimes you don't know what that balance is. Like sometimes, like we're talking about things right now, they didn't go far enough. And other times it's like you're not going to talk about it at all. So it's that balancing act. I think that's weird. So yeah, it was just weird for him to be on screen and not talk to really Atlanta almost at all. I'm like, this is how the first Aquaman starts. What are we doing? That should be a whole thing, and it's not a thing. So yeah, of course I like seeing Tamira Morrison. It's fine. He's a granddad now. He's a happy granddad. Yeah, but like, dang, dude, I just thought there would be a little bit more there.
Shit, like father, like son, I guess, because Arthur did not talk to fucking Amber Heard at all in this movie. He barely spoke a word to her. So much so that she's turning piss on his face in his direction. Like that's their relationship at this point. That's
That's
what
the
that's
relationship.
what it's been reduced to. Yeah, man, missed opportunity. There could have been a lot there because it could have been nice. I mean, it could have been similar to like what we even see with Orm and Arthur because Atlanta now has to adjust to like the surface world and I guess
Mm,
learn earthly customs too. Like there could have been
yeah,
some funny
a
scenes
whole
between
family learning how to be on Earth.
that's it. Like a dinner scene, something, like some outing, like let's go to the fucking zoo with the bait, like anything.
Mhm.
A couple of lines could have just like really keyed us into what they've been up to for the past couple of years and how their relationship has grown and developed. And we just get like, yeah, she's around when he's almost about to die. And there's like that one shot at the end, they're sitting on the grass smiling at nothing, because fucking Jason Momoa probably wasn't even there that day when he's dancing. I don't know. But it's all just weird handling of characters. But same goes for the Queen Nicole Kidman, our AMC queen, who's
Yeah,
back in this movie. Man, heartbreak doesn't feel good in this particular instance. I
it does
mean,
not.
it feels good in almost every other movie, but not in this movie. She's also back here, and I think just I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, but that's kind of for a reason. She just doesn't have a ton to do. She's very much more of a factor in the first film the whole entire premise really of the first movie is about her and the search for her, you know, and Arthur reconnecting with her. And now that's not really here. I guess her most prevalent scene in this movie is the moment when she's able to reconnect with Orm and Arthur at the same time, and she sends them
Mhm.
off, you know, to go defeat Black Manta. You know, she's like, you know, promise me that you'll, you know, stick together and, you know, see this through, or whatever she says, and they all embrace each other. So that's supposed to feel like a good moment, like, oh wow, the two young sons and their mother finally connecting on the same page. And it was okay. It was fine for what
Mhm.
it was, but that's really it. That's all. That's the only place that it goes. And that's weird too, because even in that first movie, the one thing that both Arthur and Orm have in common is their reverence for their mother, their respect for her. You know, we see
Mhm.
Orm very much kind of have that vulnerable soft spot, and it's similar to Thor and Loki. I mean, that's how
Yeah.
Frigga was in the MCU.
Mhm.
Again, sort of another derivative point to why this movie doesn't work as well. You know, they're doing a lot of the same beats, but
It's Thor.
it's there. You know, it's at least there, and they played with it, but they chose not to play with it in this movie. And so, how did you feel about, you know, the AMC queen herself and just what she brought to the movie?
You know what's interesting? They did not play her AMC video before this. Before I went to
Really?
go see the movie. I don't know if it was like a weird day,
Actually,
but I
you know
was
what? I didn't see it either when I
but
saw
I
it. Now
but I
that you
was
say
sitting there
that,
like, wait a second, no Nicole? Like it almost I had to like look around the room. Like, did anybody else notice that
what the fuck
Nicole
is that about? How are you not
didn't
gonna play the
happen just
Nicole
then?
ad before
And
the
she's
Nicole
in the
movie?
movie. It's nuts. I was like, whoa, this is weird.
It's almost like an overcorrection where they're like, "Oh, we can't be that on the nose. We can't play." But that's like
no,
a
you
weird
can.
dissonance. Like you should and you
You
can and you
should.
should. You
You
know,
can and you should.
that's strange.
Yeah, that threw me off a lot. But you said it all, man. It's crazy. I think what's also frustrating about this movie is the cast is fire. On paper, you see this cast. Let's say we never heard of Aquaman ever, and the cast comes out. We're like, oh, this is going to be the greatest. It's going to be one of the greatest superhero movie films I've ever seen, and we just don't get it. We got to get Nicole in a DC movie or in a Marvel movie, man. It's time. We had her in Batman Forever.
Yep.
She's an Aquaman. She has to step into Marvel. That way when she does play, the way she can play her AMC, and then we can watch a movie with her in it in Marvel. But yeah, just unfortunate for what she is as a character. That what's funny because you literally just said the one scene that pops in my head when I think about Atlanta in this movie is when she's sending Arthur and Orm away and she hugs him and she goes, "Make sure you hold on to each other. You're brothers." That's the one that's the one cheesy ass memorable thing I
Oh, it's
remember.
so bad. Oh man. Even when you said it, I was just like, they really wrote that shit into this movie.
It
Oh
was
my
so
God.
corny. They had so much cheesy and corny stuff. But it's just because it's generic. It's like we've heard it before, we've been there. But again, man, yeah, it's just yeah, it's too bad. I wish they gave everybody more. And it's weird to see Nicole Kidman, I guess, reduced in this way, just because knowing who she is as an actress is just like, of course, sometimes you can take that back seat. You don't have to be the main character or anything, but it's just like, damn, you couldn't have a little bit more to do. You're literally the queen of AMC. What is this? What are we doing? So yeah, man, it's too bad. I wish. And one thing I will say, I love Atlanta's look, like the all white
Hmm.
with her hair, the way it blows underwater or whatever. I'm like, now they got her right. I'm like, yeah, she looks really cool. She looks like she was a queen. Yeah, I don't know. I love the way she looks. And it's just like, dang, they couldn't utilize her enough to make it feel substantial, I guess. So yeah, it's too bad.
I would trade her presence in this movie to get the AMC ad played before the movie. I'd trade those two
Absolutely.
things off because yeah, you definitely, you know what's weird? When I saw the movie the first time, the previews played with no sound, like at all. Like all the previews played for about 20 minutes. It's a long
That's a bad
time.
omen, man.
And I'm sitting there like, this is the weird, and it's already only like probably 15 people in the theater anyway, so it's not like a
Hmm.
bunch of chatter. It's not an electricity that you would feel before a really big movie or an important movie. It's just like quiet. You can hear people eating their popcorn. The previews are playing on the screen, but no sound, and then they just skip the ad altogether, and it's like, okay, we're just diving in here. This does not feel good. This is not how you ease me into the movie and get
Hmm.
me ready to get excited for this. Um, quickly, how did you feel about the action in the movie? We haven't talked much about it, I guess, because it's probably not all that memorable. But like,
Yeah,
did any of the action stand out to you? Because I do remember that first movie, like there was some dope action scenes. Like there was
yeah.
some fire stuff. I loved like the final 20 25 minutes in that first movie is
Mm-hmm. It's
fucking
crazy.
wild. So much shit happens. It turns into like a war kaiju movie out of nowhere. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, yo, where did this come from? But it's great. And this movie didn't have any of that. It's kind of weird that the first movie felt so big, it felt
Yeah,
so grand,
that
and
scope, man.
and the scope of it.
Mm-hmm.
And this story is technically kind of supposed to be bigger because there are more earthly world implications, and
Mm-hmm.
it oddly felt smaller. And I think that that was reflected in the action as well.
Yeah, for sure. I there was one action scene I did like. It was the way it was directed. I thought the choreography was decent. It's between Black Manta in Aquaman for sure, but I can't remember exactly what was happening.
Oh, was it the
Um,
Trident fight where they were
it was
like
the
dual?
Trident fight.
That was good. Yeah,
I was like, oh, this is good. That was
yeah,
like a part of the movie where I was like, I perked up, just a little bit. I was like, oh yeah, I like that scene. And then that's really, and I think, to your point, it's it's hard to go from that cool, random, crazy war that's happening with all these crazy underwater creatures. And then we don't really get that in this. We get like this. It sounds really bad, but it kind of feels like, like the first Suicide Squad, where it's like a bunch of random zombies kind of around, you know what I mean? And we're like, that's not really interesting
no,
anymore, all these random
just cannon fodder.
zombies.
Yeah,
Yeah, just kind of that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to see that. That's yeah, and so it definitely takes away from what the action I feel like could be. So yeah, other that's the one memorable fight scene. I think I will go back and watch that scene. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, that was a good scene. But other than that, nah, man, a lot of the fighting just wasn't there. I will say the anytime there was action, that was the time I perked up a little bit more though. And because I think it still looks good, and I think that's the thing that James Wan probably had his hands on the most, if that makes sense. Like, as you kind of said, oh, this is probably a committee movie, and this movie to me really doesn't feel like, if James Wan had nobody saying anything to him, this is not the movie. Like, this is not, I think, what we would have gotten. But those are the small moments. I'm like, yep, okay, this is where James Wan is directing. This is where he's able to be like, this is how the action should go. We're gonna do this, this, and this. And then as soon as that story hits again, it gets boring again. So yeah, it's not the greatest action in the world, but I will say those are like at least like the moments of the movie. I'm like, okay, at least I have something to look at. At least there's something visually that I can pay attention to.
yeah. The movie that James Wan made where he probably got no notes was *Malignant*, and oh my god,
I love that movie. I'm sorry.
you could
It's
tell
time to
nobody
cut
no
out the cancer.
nobody said shit to him on *Malignant*. Nobody said a thing to him. They just let that man fucking cook. For better, for worse, however you feel about it, they let him cook. But yeah, no, there wasn't any. Like you said, I agree. The Trident fight, because it was like a one shot, and they were just like going back and
Yeah.
forth. The Tridents were hitting. That was cool, but everything else was just like it was just forgettable. Nothing,
Mhm.
nothing all that memorable. Seen it before, done that. Like even Atlantis, it's just like everything was the same. Like we didn't even go to like any new corners of Atlantis. We didn't see anything
Mhm.
different from the first movie. Like we went through the same fucking entranceway. It's just like,
Yep.
okay, and I get that that's an entranceway, but like do something interesting. I think
And
I
then we ended up at another kingdom.
yes, right. Another fucking kingdom
Another
that
kingdom.
appears randomly at the end of the second act, that's just been away. This movie's called The Lost Kingdom, and they don't reference it until there's like 30 minutes left in the
Till
movie.
like the end of the film. That
It's
was
like
so crazy.
is that really the subtitle of this movie? Like what's the real importance? And I think the Thor movies were kind of a victim of this too, where
Hmm.
the brilliance of Ragnarok is that they had to come in and really kind of just do away with all of that shit because it was getting
Yeah.
old. Like we saw
Hmm.
Asgard, we were saying like the same shit. It's like, all right, it's cool, like we got it. It's nice that Asgard is getting the big screen treatment and we're living in this world, even though like we're kind of spending too much time on Earth. But then when
Hmm.
we get to Ragnarok, they just do away with all of that shit. They take away all the things that we would typically associate with that world and that character, and again, really deconstruct it. And this won't ever get a third opportunity to do so, nor does it deserve one. At
Right.
this point, but
Hmm.
maybe there could have been something. Thor: The Dark World was not a great movie. I mean,
Yeah.
people like Thor 1, Thor 2 was like, eh. And so we kind of needed that third one to really just, reinvigorate our love for the character in
Hmm.
that world. And, I would always, at least be interested to see what James Wan could do. I'd always give him that
Exactly.
chance. But
Yeah.
yeah, you do walk away from this one just like, damn, bro, it's just nothing. It's nothing additive here at all. I guess as we wrap up here, because I don't know if we have much to say about the Brine King, without Crab Arm again. He lost it by the end of the movie. Um, just random shit. There was also the seahorse that they didn't use. You remember the
That
seahorse?
seahorse, I love the seahorse.
I remember seeing the artwork for that, thinking like, "Oh shit, Arthur's gonna ride a seahorse in this movie," and he does it for 3 seconds in the
Three
beginning of the
seconds.
movie, and you never see fucking the seahorse again. It's like, oh, okay, we just got excited about that for nothing. The octopus comes back. That's like the best gag of the first one,
Hmm.
and the gag just doesn't work again because they don't understand like why that first one worked so well. But really, the final moments of this movie after they defeat Black Manta and all the other shit that goes on. I mean, the big sort of resolution is that Aquaman is able to finally reveal Atlantis to the world. That's like the big resolution where we see that they're going to make their presence known. And so we see them arrive in New York City. Aquaman becomes an official member of the United Nations, and so they're gonna coexist peacefully, which kind of goes against their traditions and the council, because the council has always felt that if we ever reveal ourselves, it's going to be in an act of war. It's going to be to take over. But he has obviously gone the other way. Very much taking, I think, similar approaches to what we've seen elsewhere. So, what were your thoughts on just like that final resolution? The fact that like Atlantis is now, sort of revealed itself, even though this is not going to go anywhere. Like we're not going to ever see what this could mean. That's kind of like the big final note, I guess, of this franchise and of this particular character.
Man, I think the weirdest thing out of that whole scene is him ending by saying, "I'm Aquaman." I was like, is this what are we doing here? I don't
They
I
thought
just
that
could
was a good
not.
idea. That's a
you
reshoot for fucking sure. They
you
reshot that
thought
recently.
you thought it was good to end the DCEU the way the MCU began? That's kind of nuts. I ain't gonna lie. I was like, y'all really, that's a bold take. That's a bold take there, guys. I don't know why that was the decision or why we decided to do that. But if anything, to me, it almost felt like they handed them the trophy. Like, you know what I'm saying?
I
Like,
think
here you
that's what it
go.
was. I that if I had to guess, that's probably
Y'all
the
won.
that's probably the pickup that James Gunn ordered, and he's like,
Mm-hmm.
this shit is over. This shit is officially over. And I used to work for Marvel. They paid me
Mm-hmm.
quite well over there. We're gonna go ahead and officially acknowledge we fucking lost, y'all. We sucked. We lost, and here it is. Here's this meta,
Yeah.
fourth wall breaking joke that I mean, it was a complete miss though. It was not a good. It was not good at all.
I was like, I just really could like I didn't it was funny. I also was in the theater with like maybe 15 people, like you said. Like 15 is about accurate. I didn't hear a laugh, a snicker. I was so shocked that he said that that I was like, oh, that's what this is. That's what this is. They
What
literally gave Marvel the win.
What's worse, this ending or the ending to Quantumania from earlier this year, the bad cake gag?
Oh man, it might have been. At least this one was shooting for something. That bad cake was like, what? I also can't believe they included that in the movie. Sometimes you should just leave it alone, bro.
Are their brains just broken? Like, do we just not know how to fucking just have a good final scene anymore? Like, what the fuck is happening? Like, this is like actively bad stuff. And I think we go to see these things. Like, I had the same reaction I had to Quantum Mania. I was like, that's it? Like, that's literally the end of the movie? Okay. That's
That's
a
the end
fucking
of
crap way to go
oh,
out.
and to add on to it, we haven't talked about this part yet. But the post credit scene, Stinger,
Shit. Might as well just go
whatever,
ahead and get to it.
whatever you want to. But Orm is now living on land, and he is eating a burger at a shop for the first time. He's like, dang, this burger is good. But after he takes his first bite of the burger, he sees a roach crawl onto the table, and he decides to put the roach on the burger. And then he bites into the burger with a loud crunch that the roach makes. And he makes a, that was okay kind of face. That's how we're ending the DCEU with a roach on the burger.
And that's after he already tried a roach earlier in the movie and got the burger recommendation from his brother. But that is, yes, that is literally the final scene of a 15 film franchise that will always have to live with. Um, it, it's
I,
it's it's so ironic. It's almost appropriate, as you said earlier, that it just goes out
it's
with
so
like
fitting.
the the
Yeah.
the most underwhelming nonsense shit ever. Because that's what this was, complete fucking nonsense. The final 5 minutes of all of this.
Yeah, I won't forget it. And that's what's funny about it. It's so bad that I actually won't forget that. I'm always gonna remember exactly how the DCEU ended between the I'm Aquaman line and that boy eating that roach on that burger. Ah, this crazy way to end all of this. And I feel like I don't know, you just have an opportunity to end it so many other ways. Like you said, are your brains broken? What are we doing? Because in some ways, for me, it's almost disrespectful too. It's almost like there's still people involved in all these movies doing all of this work. You know what I'm saying? Not every DCEU movie was bad either. You know what I mean? This wasn't like everything wasn't the shit train that the full universe ended up being. And so it's like, dang, that's how y'all going out. It's just kind of sad by the end of it. And yeah, I just can't believe they went there. I can't.
Yeah, they could have done other things. I mean, even though like this is going out in the most underwhelming fashion ever. I mean, wouldn't it have just been nice to maybe have gotten like a montage of like these movies? Like,
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe that would have been just completely tone deaf. Like if we got this montage of like, hey, look at all these terrible movies we made. I don't know if that's the way to go per se, but as you said, not all of them are terrible. There are like good things,
Yeah.
and there's characters that we've come out of this that we do appreciate and love, and people that I want to see again. But
Oh, I'm
yeah,
missing Henry Cavill. I'll tell you that right now.
oh my god, or if Margot Robbie doesn't do Harley Quinn ever again,
Oh, there's no way. There's
that's a
just no
net
way.
loss. That's a fucking net
A
loss
net
right there.
loss is
So
right.
yeah, man, it's weird. It's so weird that it all ended in this fashion, but we have the movie and we have the ending, and that's what it was. You see how we just talked about all of that. I mean, we didn't talk anything about the fucking world now knowing Atlantis was present because it doesn't matter. That's really the point of it all. It just does not matter. It has no
It does not.
fucking bearing on anything that they're ever gonna do ever again because Jason Momoa is Lobo. Now, you heard it here first because yeah, that's really the end of it all. I guess as we wrap up here, before like final thoughts and like I guess just like a re-examination of the legacy of the DCEU. I do want to get like thoughts on that. Where would this movie rank for you? And it's up to you if you want to include Zack Snyder's Justice League. I think with that it'll make 16 movies, but without,
Hmm.
I think they're standing at 15 movies. But now we have like a final complete picture of this whole thing. And so if you had to place this film in comparison to the other DCEU films over the past 10 years, where would it fall for you?
Yeah, I do have all 16 here. Because Zack Snyder's Justice League is like a whole nother. If it's like it's like dang, it's almost like it's good, and I can't not include it because it's good. And their ratio already isn't that great, so I need to include it in order to make it better. Um, it is this movie right now was sitting for me at 13 out of 16. What I have under it is Wonder Woman 84, Justice League, and Suicide Squad. And that's yeah, man, that's pretty much it. I have and right above it, I like it just a little bit better, is actually Black Adam, which is not the highest bar in the world. But yeah, Black Adam at 12, and then again underneath Wonder Woman 84, Justice League, and Suicide Squad. So yeah, that's where it falls for me right now.
Yeah, literal same, literal same, like no differences at all. I do like Black Adam just a little bit better. At least you got The Rock there. The rest of
Yeah.
these, it's above like Wonder Woman 84 is
I
so
can't believe they
bad.
made that. Yeah.
It's so bad. I just can't. What a fall from grace. And yeah, Justice League and Suicide Squad, we saw how those turned out as well. Yeah, it just doesn't match the heights, even of the mediocre efforts from this year. Like Shazam: Fury of the Gods wasn't great, but I'll watch that before I watch Aquaman and the
Oh,
Lost
for
Kingdom
sure.
again. There's a great family dynamic there at least, and so yeah, man. That's kind of where things stand. So as we wrap up here, I mean the movie is what it is. We just talked about it, but what are your thoughts, man? DC Extended Universe. It's just such an interesting thing that we've witnessed for the past 10 years, from 2013 with Man of Steel to now 2023 with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Technically 15 movies, but 16 if you count Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Hmm.
I guess largely a failed experiment, if we're being completely honest about it. We know that this universe was launched to compete with the Marvel Cinematic
Mm-hmm.
Universe to a
Mm-hmm.
certain extent, and it's never been close. Unfortunately, there have been chances where things could have turned around, and we could have seen some positive things occur from the DCEU, but the momentum was just never there because it got off to a really rocky start. They never really won everyone over, even with successful
Mm-hmm.
movies like Wonder Woman or Aquaman
Mm-hmm.
1 or even finally the fucking internet culture getting their Zack Snyder cut. It just was never enough to lift this thing, to lift this franchise above all of the naysayers and the controversy and just the bad blood that I think existed between audiences and the studio that's been kind of shepherding this. And so, what do you ultimately think the legacy of the DCEU is going to be as we contextualize this, as we think about it and reflect on it for the next few years? Is it a cautionary tale? Is it the prime example of how not to do a cinematic universe? How do you see just, how this whole thing played out over the past decade?
Yeah, I think the tagline it will definitely be mid. That will be the tagline for a long time. Mediocre at best as a sequel. You know what I'm saying? And so, man, I think one of the biggest, and I've been saying this for a very long time, even since the beginning. And I think again, one of the first sour tastes in my mouth for the DCEU really was BVS, man. But I've been saying this for a very long time. It's run your own race, man. It's like Marvel Cinematic Universe was firing on all cylinders, and DC, I don't mind that they had the inspiration to make their own cinematic universe. It was the way they tried to rush into it. Like they said, "Oh, this is our what movie? First, second, third movie, and we are going to make a Batman versus Super." It's just it was too much happening, way too fast. They tried to recreate that feeling with DC characters, again, that Marvel had already had. And it was too much too fast. Not only that, but this franchise definitely did suffer from studio stuff. You know what I mean? It's not just
Oh my
not running
God.
your own race, but Warner Brothers has been on fire for the almost the entire duration of the DCEU. And not only that, tragedy has happened between what Zack Snyder and his daughter. You know what I mean? There's just so much that was going on. And the Ezra Miller of it, there's just too much. There's too much. In some ways, it kind of feels cursed. You know what I mean? It kind of feels cursed a little bit, the ways in which, all of this turned out. And I think I do appreciate the attempt, but overall, man, you gotta run a tight ship, and you gotta stop comparing yourself to other people so much. And I think we would be in a completely different place right now had they not tried to be so much like the MCU and tried to chase that glory so fast, as in the way that the MCU did. And so overall, man, there are things I will still love from this universe. I still love Wonder Woman. I'll still love Man of Steel. I still love this James Gunn Suicide Squad, Zack Snyder's Justice League in particular. Even though I think it's 4 hours, it's a good film. I still love some of these things. Aquaman, as we just got done talking about, crazy different movie. But overall, man, it was. I think you said it earlier. Best is failed experiment. Stop trying to play catch up, just run your own race, do your own thing, tell your own stories in the pace that you need to tell them. And I think we the result would be vastly different. And yeah, that's how I feel about the DCEU.
Are we gonna review Rebel Moon? Are we gonna talk about that? I,
We might not need to, because I think I'm just gonna be upset the whole time. Just gonna be mad the whole time.
yeah, I have nothing to say really. But DC, wow. Man, before I was ever a Marvel fan, I was a DC fan. Before I was a DC fan, I was a Batman fan. Batman is my favorite superhero of all time. I'm gonna take that to the grave. And so he was my entry point into DC, and grew up with those characters, and eventually that spun out into Marvel, of course. And I think any reasonable person that has a good head on their shoulders doesn't choose sides. You love all these things because there's great characters and great
Mhm.
villains on both sides, great creative, all that great stuff. And so when this all was starting, I was super excited. I mean, That time period of 2013, 2014, 2015, leading into 2016 was a super exciting time with the prospect of what we were going to get with BVS. And I remember just being so enthusiastic about what that could mean, even though I was cautious about how quickly they were moving and knowing that this is kind of going in a different way than what we saw with Marvel. I still have faith. And that film, that theatrical cut of that film, which is, our first impression really of it, um, was just so damaging to everything. And they never really found their footing after that. And Suicide Squad, the 2016 version, in addition to that, just all of that stuff was already creating such a negative perception for what people thought about these characters in this universe. And as you said, regime changes, the studio and what Warner Brothers has been through. I think that they've gone through no less than 4 regime changes in the midst of all of this. And that's just no way to create continuity and consistency. And I think that that's my big takeaway from all of this. More than anything, more than the quality of the movies, more than our perception of the characters that they decide to utilize or the platform that they debut on or whatever the fuck might happen. If you don't have the singular vision of one people, or in the case of what they're going to do now, 2 people, at least a cohesive unit of people. It doesn't matter the number. If you're not
Mm-hmm.
operating with the singular vision, it was never going to work. And I know Warner Brothers has been a director friendly studio for all of their history, and that's a great thing. They have allowed directors to go crazy and to do incredible stuff. That's why we have films like Joker and the Batman.
Mm-hmm.
But at a certain point, what I think has been successful with Marvel, and it's been a detriment to some extent, but that why they were able to run a tight ship for so long is that it all funneled through one vision at the end of the day. It was all through the auspices of Kevin Feige and what he
Mm-hmm.
wanted to achieve with those characters in that story. And you need that. You do need that. You want to have your creatives play in the sandbox and do what they can do and bring their own take and vision to these characters and to these stories. But at the end of the day, the buck has to stop somewhere. And somebody has to say, this is what we're going to do, period. And it has to be in good faith. And they should probably be knowledgeable and be a fan of this material to know what's capable. And we just never really had that. We never had
Mm-hmm.
that. It's been a state of confusion. It's been a state of questions and underperformance and underwhelming outputs just across the board. And it's a shame because there is just so much untapped potential. I mean, DC has some of the greatest characters. They have the greatest villains. They have some of the most memorable stories. Even their comic arcs are, I mean, come on, like so
Mm-hmm.
influential. And we just have never gotten to see the heights that we know that they could reach. And so I think ultimately looking at the DCEU for the past 10 years, it is somewhat of a cautionary tale of not doing too much too soon. I love what you say about run your own race and not comparing yourselves because you can't do that. And hopefully James Gunn and Peter Safran do not do that. And it feels like that they won't because it does feel like that they're going to take a bit of a different approach with their rollout and ultimately have a singular vision and know what that vision is and plan out ahead, plan 5, 10, 15 years into the future. So you can at least always fall back on that roadmap because that's going to be your Bible for these stories at the end of the day. And you kind of need that to guide you into the right direction. And so we got some good stuff out of it. I do love a few of these movies. I am grateful that we got them. I'm grateful that we got to see Ben Affleck be Batman and Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. And that's all great stuff that we'll always have to look back on. We'll always have those movies. But at the end of the day, it did not reach the heights and the potential of what it could have. And I think that's sad. That's sad that it never got there. And so we'll just have to start over from scratch and see what they can do in the new DC studios. But folks, with all of that said, those are all of our thoughts on Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the final movie in the DC extended universe. If you've checked out this movie, hit us up and let us know what you think.